Friday, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans presented by Kroger. Today, not just any Friday for the fabled young host here. This is also a getaway day. Vacation for me next week. Have no fear on two fronts. First of all, vacation shows for next week already in the can. Shorter, a little different. Not obviously timely and newsy, the way we typically like to do around here, but nonetheless, our Own the East season preview running next week. That's going to be a lot of fun. Also, my solemn vow to you is to finish strong here today, to really go out on a high note, at least the best we possibly can. Jeff Sentell will help with that later on. I'm also going to kind of cover a lot of ground. Some of this not important at all, just kind of fun for me. In some cases, maybe some things that need to be said. We'll address Terrence Ferguson's commitment from this, or the commitment decision this upcoming weekend. So we'll try to do all of that with you next. Good to have you with us, DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So one of my very first jobs in media was years and years ago. I used to do some stuff at Turner Field every day, covering the Braves for the radio station I worked for at the time. Now, when I tell you I had no idea of what I was doing, I've never really been what I would think of as a reporter. That's not really the job that I have ever coveted. That's not what I do for a living, right? I was in kind of a reporter role back then, but I was not filling that role very well. It was fascinating for me, though, because this was the first time in my life I'd ever spent a lot of time kind of inside a clubhouse, what you think of as like a locker room, inside the boundaries of the world of sports. And there was something about that that was really fascinating to me, and I promise I'm going somewhere with that. When the major league teams were about to go on a road trip, they would show up at the stadium wearing a suit and tie for whatever reason. Like that was their way of, they're going to get dressed up to leave. It's a getaway day. They're going, on the road. They're getting away after this. They got to be dressed up for that. For whatever reason, that just was the Major League Baseball tradition. My point in saying all this is it is also a getaway day for me as well, although I am not wearing a suit and tie the way that you sometimes see in the world of professional sports. On vacation next week, but we are going to finish strong today with a lot of, I guess, kind of a catch-all here, a couple different topics I do want to spend a couple of minutes on, and then something just for fun. I'm going to keep Jeff Sentell. I'm going to try to, get a lot in with him in a brief amount of time. I don't want to take up too much of his time on a Friday, but I want to talk to him about some of the recruiting storylines that are out there. In fact, let me begin this way today on a couple of fronts. This upcoming weekend, four-star offensive lineman Terrence Ferguson set to make his commitment announcement. I don't have to tell you that the internet doesn't necessarily think this bodes well for Georgia. There's a lot of pessimism out there amongst the online chatter about how Georgia sets up with Terrence Ferguson. I guess this is somewhat complicated a little bit by the news that some of you may be aware of. The James and Tommy Brockmeyer, two very good offensive linemen. In one case, James' case, the number one tackle in the country. They're both out of Texas. They're slated to make their commitment announcement here today, and both are expected to select Alabama. Does that complicate things for Ferguson at all? I mean, we've seen Georgia stockpile offensive lineman before. I don't think Alabama would have a problem stockpiling its own offensive lineman as well. They've already got Latham. They've already done some work on the offensive line anyway. And they may be about to stockpile. There's some thought here that that's where Ferguson's going to end up, not going to Georgia. Another example of a guy, if it does play out that way, of a guy that a lot of Georgia fans at one point in time thought for sure was coming to UGA, ending up making a different decision. The fact that Ferguson hails from Peach County makes it all the weirder because we just sort of think of Peach County as being an incredible pipeline to UGA, the kind of place that Georgia seems to go to get its pick of the litter. Georgia and Peach County have always had a great relationship with each other. One of the Peach County players in the Georgia roster right now, Kyrus Jackson, has been vocal on Twitter in his support for Ferguson, the hopes that he would come to UGA. So it'll at least be a little eye-opening if that weren't to take place. And it leads to the question that in some form and fashion, we've been wrestling with it now for a while, of is this still going to be an elite 2021 class for Georgia when you have some examples of players at one point in time that Georgia seemingly was prioritizing who may now be going somewhere else? Ultimately, what does Ferguson do this weekend? I'll wait and let him make his own announcement, but as I said before, you can't deny that there's some pessimism on the part of Georgia fans about how all of that plays out. Now, to be fair, I like who Georgia already has in the fold. I like Micah Morris, a lot. I like Dylan Fairchild a lot. I really like those guys, and I expect Georgia to seemingly still be in a pretty good spot with Amarius Mims there, too. So Georgia's certainly not failing to get the job done when it comes to offensive line recruitment, but Ferguson's one of those guys we've talked about for a little bit. So we will get into this more with Jeff when he joins us in just a little bit, but my own opinion on that is this. I still think, even if I can't quite pencil in all the names, I still think that Georgia is heading for an elite class here in 2021. I'm using the word elite deliberately here. The idea of being the number one overall class, mathematically that may just be impossible, just given some of the other stuff that's going on. Recruiting momentum for Alabama, as a for instance on this, may be really hard to do. Some of the, Georgia may not be heading for a number one ranked class in 2021. But the kind of top three type class that keeps the momentum that Georgia has established dating back to the 2017 class, where it's, 3, then 1, then 2, then 1 again, finding a way to be somewhere in that top 3-ish range, that, somewhere in that zone. I think that's absolutely still a possibility for UGA. I don't quite know how all of it's going to fall into place, but I'd be surprised if it doesn't work out that way. I think one of the things that you should take a little bit of comfort in is that Clemson has also been upended a bit by what has gone on during this coronavirus lockdown. We're not used to seeing Clemson have a lot of decommitments, but Corey Foreman has decommitted from the program. Jordan Hancock has decommitted from the program. I think that all of us would assume that Clemson's still set up to have an elite class there as well. Certainly Clemson's gotten its pick of the 5 stars as much as it's won in the last couple of years, much the same way that Georgia has. So I would say that for the most part, we are in just a very odd recruiting cycle. And, Georgia, for whatever reason, has seemingly been hamstrung by the absence of visits in a way that some other programs are not. But once those visits do take place, my expectation is that Georgia will use them to its advantage. I also will say this about Kirby Smart. One of the things I'm always fascinated with when it comes to Smart, because in addition to just the actual results of recruiting, how many good players do you get, I've always been kind of interested in the process by how all of this comes together. And the best that I can tell, as kind of an outsider looking in, Smart is really comfortable in, kind of having a lot of irons in the fire, for lack of a way to say that. Having a lot of recruiting battles you have to fight. I've told you before that if it was me, if I was the architect of the Georgia recruiting program, I might be content to take a lot more easy wins as a way of gearing up to go out and fight some contested battles for a few guys. Smart is just a lot more aggressive than on the recruiting trail. He's a lot more willing to fight contested battles. So what the rest of this 2021 recruiting cycle is going to look like, I think, is a scenario in which Smart himself is actually kind of comfortable with that. Having to chase from behind in a couple of recruits, having to be in the mix with players who have a truly legitimate chance of going elsewhere. I think for the most part, Smart's going to be okay with that. We'll let Jeff Sentell put some of his own thoughts around this a little bit later on, but ultimately, even if Ferguson chooses somewhere else this weekend, which is the expectation, my expectation remains unchanged that top 3-ish class, 300-plus points, maybe something along those lines with the 24/7 stuff. My expectation is that Georgia still puts an elite class together for 2021, and we will follow that and see where it goes. Before we kind of move on, let me also shift gears and talk about something completely different just for a moment. And that is, I saw the story at DawgNation.com yesterday that Georgia and Florida are still planning on playing. This is according to Scott Strickland. This is according to Georgia Athletic Director Greg McGarity, Mike Griffith, writing about this at DawgNation.com. Still planning on playing the Georgia-Florida game in Jacksonville this year, even though typically Georgia-Florida in Jacksonville is about the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. And one way or another, if there is any version of the cocktail party, it would appear to be not the world's largest here during the 2020 season. And there's an obvious contrast based on what's going on right now between Texas A&M and Arkansas, two teams that typically play at Jerry World. Jerry Jones, the Cowboys owner, is an Arkansas booster, a former Arkansas player, an Arkansas graduate. He likes the idea of hosting his alma mater in his stadium every single year. Well, Ross Bjork, the Texas A&M athletic director, has pushed for A&M Arkansas to not be played in Jerry World this year. He wants the game played in College Station, and it seems like Arkansas is sort of okay with that as long as they get a return date in Fayetteville the following year. And the question, and Mike basically asked this in the, some of the stuff that he's done, whether it be the story that he wrote or in our Cover 4 live broadcast yesterday on the DawgNation video channels, the thing that Mike brought up is, and maybe other Georgia fans feel this way too, well, why is it that Arkansas and Texas A&M are working to play theirs in a home and home this year, and Georgia and Florida are still going to play in Jacksonville, even if it ends up being an empty stadium? And I'll tell you this, I'm fine with the decision that Georgia and Florida are making. In fact, that would be my preferred choice for this year, even if it is an empty stadium, and we already know that the stadium in Jacksonville is already planning for greatly reduced capacity for Jaguars games, which is really not that different than the per usual situation for the Jags there. but where they're already planning for greatly reduced attendance for those games. So there is certainly a chance that Georgia and Florida has no one in the building when these two teams play in Jacksonville. And yet that's still the scenario that I would be in favor of for that game this year, because I do view 2020 as a one-off, no matter how you kind of get there and no matter where you go with that. The big difference between Texas A&M and Arkansas is Ross Bjork, the Aggies athletic director, has been very clear on this point. He doesn't want to play Arkansas in Dallas or wherever it is. He doesn't want to play the game in Dallas every single year. That's not what he wants. He said he wants to move the game to an on-campus venue. Georgia and Florida is just a different situation. Now, some Georgia fans don't like the cocktail party anymore. Kirby Smart has kind of hoped, seemingly, that it'll move back to a home-and-home situation. He's been pretty clear about that. But overall, big picture, Georgia and Florida for the foreseeable future is going to remain in Jacksonville. And frankly, to move the game, away from that on kind of a one-off basis is, that's just, to me, not all that realistic. The other thing here is, on a neutral field, Texas A&M is about a 3-touchdown favorite over Arkansas. Georgia and Florida, while Georgia will clearly be the point spread favorite, these are the two best teams in the SEC East. Florida has been the darling of the national media. So changing the venue, potentially giving one team or the other the edge in that scenario, is very, very different than changing the venue for an A&M Arkansas game, which for the most part is not expected to be competitive. So that's my defense of that and my case for that. Obviously, around here, we think the biggest rival that Georgia has is Florida. We're still huge fans of the cocktail party. There may not be a cocktail party this year, but the game in Jacksonville, to me, still makes a lot of sense. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. Good to have you with us across all the platforms today, live on video, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and as a podcast wherever you find them. Good to have all of you with us here today. Let me take a moment to kind of give you an idea of what the next few days are going to look like here around DawgNation Daily. So this is our last live show for a week. Now, by live, I mean we do the show live on video, and most of you podcast radio, you're hearing something recorded after the fact anyway. We're going to take a break next week on radio because we're doing shorter shows. I'm going to be on vacation. But if you normally connect with us through video, Facebook or YouTube, if you normally connect with us through podcast, we will have shows next week. We've been doing our Own the East season preview, and a lot of what we'll do next week will be Own the East themed, looking at all the key position groups for UGA, looking at the key games for Georgia and the SEC, looking at how the SEC West is going to play out. We're doing all of that next week with you. A lot of that's going to include John Stinchcomb. John was good enough to spend several minutes with us, something you'll hear a part of a series of shows next week. I've already pre-recorded an interview with Jeff Sentell to run as a part of next week's stuff. Obviously, pre-recorded this far in advance is not the ideal situation. We like doing the show the day of. That's why we always do it that way. But for a vacation situation, I'm lucky enough next week to be able to spend some time with my family. We figured this was better than nothing, so you can check all of that out. Really looking forward to doing that. By the way, huge thanks to Kroger for making DawgNation Daily possible here today. Do not forget that as you head towards back to school, and listen, for a lot of different systems around the Metro Atlanta area, back to school right now looks a little bit different. Either way, we know you need this. We know you need to get stocked up for lunch because kids are still going to be eating. We know you need those school supplies because one way or another, kids are still going to be using them. No matter how different school may look for you right now, you can get your one-stop shop, not just for the household essentials and the food items that you need, but everything you need for back to school as well with our friends at Kroger. Make sure you check that out. It's going to be Jeff Sentell coming up in just a couple of minutes. I've got a lot I want to talk about with him. Before we get to that, though, I want to talk about something that's a little bit different for us. And I saw this online. This is not really like a famous person or anything. I just thought this was kind of interesting. His name is Jeff Hutchinson. I'll put a link to this when I post the show at the world-famous DawgNation.com a little bit later on. I guess he's like a little bit of a math guy or whatever. And so he did this huge database trying to quantify the best single-season performances in college football over the course of the last decade. And this is like an incredibly searchable database. You can look at, the overall list. Kyler Murray was actually number 1 on his list. Joe Burrow was number 2. You look at the rest of the top 10, you may have a little bit of a squabble with a couple of these, but for the most part, it seems pretty reasonable who's in his top 10. There's a lot of math explanation, points per play, stuff like that for kind of how he got to the destination that he did in terms of the outcome of the data. I didn't understand a lot of this, but I thought it was interesting nonetheless. So I want to read to you here for a second for reasons, no other reason other than I just thought it was kind of interesting. Of the top 10 single-season performances in Georgia football over the last decade, according to a guy named Jeff Hutchinson, who may not be famous but has put a lot of work into his work here. Number 1 on the list for Georgia and number 153 overall in the last decade, Nick Chubb in 2014. Then you get to Aaron Murray in 2012. Jake Fromm in 2017 actually comes in third on the list, number 244 overall. Then it's Hudson Mason in 2014, which is a little strange. Todd Gurley then in 2012. Then Fromm in 18. 2 more Aaron Murray seasons. DeAndre Swift in 2018. And then finally rounding up the top 10, you've got Nick Chubb in his 2017 season. So you can do with that what you will and decide if that makes a lot of sense for you. But there are 2 big takeaways from me on this list that do kind of make some sense. I think it's very easy to forget just how good Nick Chubb was in 2014. 2014 was a frustrating season, right? Georgia lost a game at South Carolina that probably shouldn't have lost. Really got manhandled at Florida against Florida in an embarrassing fashion. There's a lot of frustrating things that happened in that 2014 season. The Todd Gurley suspension's a big part of that. It's easy to forget, man, just how really, really good Nick Chubb was. And so one of the reasons I wanted to bring this up is because I like seeing Chubb kind of honored that way. I think Aaron Murray's kind of the same way. He came up just short in 2012, literally and figuratively, right there at the goal line against Alabama in that 2012 season. But the numbers that he put up, the numbers that Mike Bobo put up as offensive coordinator that year, using all that talent, Murray and Gurley and everybody else, it's important to look back and remember just how good that offense was back then there as well. So I'll put a link to this. You can kind of play around with this database and search it for yourself. You can decide if you believe it. Clearly a lot of work has gone into it, and a couple Georgia guys getting rewarded for some of the work they've done here over the last decade. Good to have you with us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We will do more of our Own the East season preview later on, a close look at the Tennessee Vols, but for now, Terrence Ferguson and the rest of the UGA recruiting stuff, let us talk to Jeff Sentell.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insight.
It would not be a Friday here on DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger if we weren't talking to Jeff Sentell, our DawgNation recruiting insider. And Jeff, there is a lot I'm going to try to cover with you, and we'll try to, I won't try to be respectful of your time, not keep you too long here, but I do want to ask you about a bunch of stuff. So if you don't mind, let me just kind of jump right back into it. It's been a couple of weeks since I think we've talked to each other. Terrence Ferguson slated to go this weekend. Internet seems to think that's bad news for UGA. Does the Brockmeyer brothers announcing today for Alabama do anything to maybe change Ferguson's feelings about what the online chatter says is his preferred choice right now of Alabama?
Yeah, so that's very interesting. Tomorrow is the decision day for Terrence Ferguson, and
excuse me,
man, that takes me back all the way to I can remember. I think it was August 2017. Terrence Ferguson was at Garrett Jackson's reveal, and we were talking about his decision day at one time and what that would look like down the road. How long was he going to take? What would he want? What would he want to make happen important to him during that walk, getting up to that point? Funny is, I remember him saying that he had a Nick Saban football camp shirt on, and would be apropos if he ends up joining an offensive line class, Brendan. And I think the point you make about the Brockmeyer twins is very interesting. First of all, number one of those players hasn't even played a lot lately. Sat out all of last year. The other one played quite a bit extensively. But if both of those guys do end up choosing Alabama, you combine it with J.C. Latham, the only tackle in the country that's rated higher in some people's mind's eye than Marius Mims. Well, then all of a sudden, that's a pretty robust offensive line class there for the University of Alabama. Does Terrence Ferguson want to be a part of that? Does he want to add to that? A lot of the chatter, Brandon, wonders about he wants to be a tackle. Maybe the feeling is he wants to go somewhere where he can be an offensive tackle. Well, if Ferguson chooses Alabama, he would be at least the third highest-rated offensive tackle in the class. Of course, Georgia would have the big target, Marius Mims, still to the side, and also Micah Morris as well. Be very interesting if it's not a Georgia or Alabama for Terrence Ferguson, and maybe a school like Florida State or even Florida Gators creep into the mix when he makes his decision this weekend.
Yeah, let me just say a couple things about this. First of all, I like who Georgia already has in the fold. I like Micah Morrison a lot. I like Dylan Fairchild a lot. I like who Georgia has, and I love the fact that Georgia seemingly is in a good position for Amarius Mims, who announced his finalists this week. I feel really good about Georgia's 2021 offensive line recruiting as a UGA fan. I'll say that. The one thing, though, that does frustrate me is the point that you brought up before. And we see this every cycle 1,000 different ways. Program X tells player Y, hey, you're not a wide receiver for us, you're a quarterback. Or they say, hey, you're not a safety for us, you're a cornerback. Or you're not a guard, you're a tackle. Whatever the glamorous position is, and on both sides of the ball, various position groups, there's just certain positions that are seemingly more glamorous than others. Certain programs are always willing to say, hey, that program may think of you as a guard, but we think of you as a tackle. And more often than not, those things end up being lies. And I get a little frustrated sometimes when I see the way in which programs seemingly use what is a fairly easy tactic of saying, program whoever, big state university over here, they may see you as a guard, but trust us, you're a tackle for us. That element of recruiting has always bothered me just a little bit.
Well, especially because you can look at who they're recruiting and who they've taken commitments from, and maybe what their tradition with the position is, and their history with players at the position. I mean, really, let's look at what Terrence Ferguson actually is. I think Terrence Ferguson is the guy that we used to call him to think about how long ago this was, Brandon. We used to call a player like Terrence Ferguson a Pittman Army knife, where he could play a bunch of positions on the line, like that 4 or 5 star who's now going back home to Rocky Top. But I don't know how that's a bad thing. An adaptable, versatile player. You look at the way Georgia recruits its cornerbacks and defensive backs, they want a guy to find a kid that can play a safety, can play a nickel corner, that can also be out there as a press man, out on an island as well. They want those variable, physical, very versatile type football players. And again, we can't say one thing about how Kirby Smart and Matt Luke want to put the best 5 guys out there. They don't necessarily mean the 2 best tackles, the 2 best guards, and the best center. They want the best 5 players out there, and they want to kind of let the chips fall where they may about whether one guy's a guard or a tackle going forward. I think Ferguson, man, he comes from that great Peach County program. Very physical, very mean football player when it's time to be. I've been watching him play high-level football for forever. And it'll be very interesting to see if a lot of that late noise changes anything with Terrence Ferguson. But if Alabama's recruiting as they should at the juggernaut levels they've always been at, I think the pitch there to Ferguson is definitely going to be, hey, come be a part of the best offensive line class since the one we signed in 2017 with Jedrick Willis, Alex Leatherwood, and so on. Because if you start putting these pieces together for Alabama, and you start adding both the Brockermeyer twins, the Latham, and then Ferguson, a very strong offensive line, Brandon. And I think the way most Georgia fans, I think, at least for those that get down in the DawgNation forum, are thinking, they're sitting there going, all right, what does this mean for men if Ferguson goes to Alabama, or what does it mean for men if Ferguson goes to Georgia? I think a lot of people are sitting there wondering, and certainly would like to have both players, but for a lot of people, the remaining offensive line recruit jewel of the class would have to be Amarius Mims for Georgia fans.
I would agree with that. Let me just do this, since you mentioned Mims, let me squeeze this in on the topic. Was Georgia's plan all along to only take 3 of these guys? Morris, Fairchild already there. It seems like Mims the far more likely third name now. Or would they have made room for all 4 if all 4 wanted to come?
I think again, Brandon, it's so hard to say now because they didn't have the evaluation in spring. They didn't have the evaluation in the team camp. They didn't really get a sense. Let's bring up the name Noah Josie here as well, Brandon. That's another name that Georgia has liked an awfully lot. And it's a matter of how many do they need to take. Remember, Brandon, a lot of folks think that Georgia, considering how they ended up with Tate Ratledge, Chad Lindbergh, Cedric Von Granger, Broderick Jones, and then on top of that added Cameron Kinney and Devin Willock and Austin Blasky as well out of last year's class. A lot of people think that Georgia, I would say, overstocked a little bit in terms of getting its offensive line room recertified for Matt Luke and what Todd Monken want to do. But I think that's more of an example of getting the players that fit the Monken system. And now you look at, how many they may or may not take in this class. I think that's going to be all dependent on the guy that they certify as the guy that can play right away for Georgia or push the depth chart, even considering how many they signed last year.
Let me ask you a question I know you're going to say no to pretty well immediately, but it still feels like my job to kind of ask this. Jordan Hancock's decommit from Clemson, does that change anything for Barrett Carter?
I don't think so. I think Jordan Hancock has always been an Ohio State guy. And I remember, I think I got some information a long time ago that it was very likely going to be Ohio State for Jordan Hancock, and then there was one of those late Clemson magical where the birds chirp and the slide is running with honey from the upper floors of the Clemson football facility, and a blissful time. And I think he just kind of fell in love with Clemson. To me, I think a lot of the Barrett Carter was actually working with Jordan Hancock, so those two could play together at Clemson. And now the reversal, I'd be very curious to see if Jordan Hancock winds up anywhere other than Ohio State now in the 2021 class. And you've got Barrett Carter. Barrett Carter just has always liked to sit there at Clemson a lot. And I do love how you start going back to Barrett Carter. Man, how long ago was that name, Brandon?
Feels like a long time ago now. Still a player I really like. Still a player I really like out of North Gwinnett, but it feels like a long time ago that he made his pledge to Clemson.
You know, Brandon, I wrote something in the forum the other day where I kind of, there's the doom and gloom and kick the dog type thinking right now, where even everybody's bacon, egg, and cheese sandwich every morning doesn't taste as sweet as it used to during this time when Georgia's recruiting is not firing on all cylinders. I just wanted to put in the fan base's mind, I'm rolling off a lot of examples: Miles Murphy, Brian Brzee, Eric Gilbert, Theo Johnson, Noah Sewell. The list goes on and on about all the guys that Georgia shot their shot for in the 2020 class. A whole bunch of 5-stars. I think I counted 17 or 18 5-stars that I saw where Georgia made a really hard run at. It just didn't end up with them. And Barrett Carter's a great football player, but he's kind of right now should be seen as a lot of those guys that just didn't work out for Georgia. And the Bulldogs still found exactly what they needed and exactly what they were looking for in the class, regardless of that decision.
Yeah, so I talked about this before you joined us, and I know that you and I are going to talk about this next Friday when you're in the show there as well. But I'll ask you right now anyway, because you can't talk about it enough. Do you still feel like Georgia pulls in an elite class? I'll define that as a top 3. You can kind of define that how you want to, but do you feel like Georgia still pulls in an elite class for 2021?
I certainly do. I think I've said many times, as long as Kirby Smart is the recruiter, the leader of the Georgia football program, I can't imagine, and I'll include a global pandemic and even into the scenario matrix here as well. I can't really envision any scenario where Georgia doesn't have a top 3 recruiting class every year with Kirby Smart on board. That's what I really think. But a lot of times I had just to say top 3, top 5, and there's a lot of things that can go wrong for Georgia still in this class, and Georgia could still end up with a top 5 recruiting class. You got to remember, Brandon, only got 13 guys committed in this cycle. And certainly, I don't know how you feel, but I think you would skip out the door on the way to your vacation if someone gave you a good look at things that might be to come, and that included some names like a Corey Foreman or an Amarius Mims,
sure,
or guys going up and down the list there of a lot of big names. Georgia's still very much in it for. In terms of, I think this class is just different, Brandon. Georgia has signed so many players over the last couple of years that there's only a few guys. I'll throw James Williams in there as well, Brock Bowers in there as well. There's only a few guys that can really significantly challenge a first-teamer or second-teamer on the depth chart anymore, except for those very, very special players. And let's also make sure to include the name Shmuel Munden Jr. in that discussion as well.
Let me move on here. Last weekend, one of the big hot topics was the fact that Brock Bowers had reportedly, taken a visit on his own dime to visit the city of Athens. You can't take, the UGA visit right now, and yet you've talked about the fact that Brock Vandegrift, the 2021 quarterback commit, was able to spend some time with him, and one of the luxuries, I guess, of having an Athens-based quarterback commit. But it also seemingly speaks about Bowers' relationship to Georgia, to the city of Athens, to everything else, that he's coming to check out the town kind of on his own dime at a time in which, the actual visits, even unofficial visits, are prohibited at the moment.
Yeah, let's do something funny, Brandon. Fun here with this. I want to give that virtual Dog Nation fan, viewer, listener, commenter, whatever, I want to give them a chance to read along with Brandon Adams real fast. Maybe that needs to be a promotional giveaway or something like that. But literally, they are at your coffee table reading a Dog Nation recruiting story, and immediately you guys can chop up what you guys thought or ascertained or CSI Dog Nation Daily through this. This is a multiple choice option, Brandon. There's 4 things in that Brock Bowers story that I think would be interesting to the fella I know well and have been talking to for the last 5 years. I want you to tell me which one of those was the most glaring for you. A, was it the fact that he had a mama's boy breakfast with Chaz Chambliss and Brock Vandagriff? B, was it simply the matter of fact that he paid out of his own dime again to not take an official or an unofficial, but heck, I'm going to do what I want to do official and just go check out Georgia again? 3, was it the fact that in his comments he said that Athens is just different? Or 4, that on his last day out of town, he went and hung out with Brock Vandagriff's family in Bogart, Georgia, when Brock Vandagriff wasn't even there. He was at his grandmother's house. Which one of those 4 things in Brandon's speech sounds the most promising for Dog Nation?
Well, not to give a free plug here, but the fact that he was at Mama's Boy for breakfast, I do take some comfort in that, because when a guy comes from, like, say, wine country in California, where I assume they're eating quiches every meal, I want to make sure that you're going to be comfortable and happy with Southern cuisine. Down here, we like to eat food that sticks to the ribs here a little bit, and I just want to make sure that young man like that is going to get acclimated to the Southern way of life here pretty quickly. So it seems like from that standpoint, he's doing pretty well there in that regard. So that to me is a box checked in terms of how happy I can envision Brock Bowers being here at the University of Georgia. But in all seriousness, it is pretty clear that Vandagriff has become a pretty good recruiter for Georgia rather quickly here. And I think that's it's great to see. We've always enjoyed, throughout the history of Dog Nation, those recruits that are themselves good recruiters, like Lavoisier Carroll's kind of ended up being one of those guys for Georgia. Previous iterations of recruiting classes, that would be Richard LeCounte or Nolan Smith, players like that. These guys who are good at recruiting for their own class, it's fun, and it seems like Vandagriff is one of those guys right now.
Yeah, one of the things that, Brandon, it seems like Georgia's maximizing all the resources it possibly can. They can do the virtual visits. They can have 2 current commitments meet a young man in Athens for a power breakfast. And Brock told me that the big cinnamon roll at Mama's Boy was something that's going to stay on his mind for quite a long time. Sounds like he ate like it was an official visit, if it was something altogether, something different entirely.
Good to know.
But then look how you speak about Vandagriff. That's a needed edge Georgia's had to have. I mean, if Georgia had won the Caleb Williams sweepstakes and their 5-star quarterback was in Washington, D.C., well, it would be very hard to get those power breakfasts together if somebody wants to check out Athens or they want to throw with Brock or they want to, for Brock, back when this was still where recruiting was happening, and if a big recruit was in town, especially receiver, running back, or offensive lineman, well, Brock could just dash over the 15 to 20 minutes and meet the young man and his family at the facility and talk shop and talk the future of Georgia football. And I don't even think Georgia has had the ability to fully access and take advantage of having their anchor quarterback commitment so close to home, other than the fishing pond trips that I know you're still fond of seeing with Brock Vandagriff and Amarius Smith.
I always love to see that. I want to finish with some reporting you had this week on Broderick Jones and what seems to be a little bit of an injury setback for him. We'll get to that in a moment. Let me deal with a couple of recruits, though, that Georgia's recently gotten, because we haven't talked to you about either one of these guys yet. Adonai Mitchell is admittedly a player I didn't really know much about until he committed to Georgia at the beginning of this week, but he's an interesting story, a little bit of a different kind of path to get to a place like Georgia. We had Terrence Edwards on the show earlier this week. He kind of bragged about his size, his ability to go get the football. Not necessarily the blazing speedster that I thought Georgia may be chasing for this class, but it seems like there's some things to like about Mitchell. Jeff, what do you like about him?
I think the first thing that's unique is that Georgia's taking a commitment here from a high school graduate. And I think the last time, Brandon, I was able to do the research on this. The last time Georgia did that was with Brian Arian in the 2016 class when Brian had to wait on his final transcript so he would be able to go through the clearinghouse and be qualified. And that was in like mid-May, late May. when that happened. But, the Mitchell story I think people need to know is, he's from Texas originally. He transferred to Tennessee for his senior year of high school football, played some quarterback and wide receiver that year. But last year, Brandon, was his senior year. So after his senior year, he reclassified to the 2021 class, and he's had a health issue. It's been reported by some outlets that he's a diabetic. I believe he's a type 1 diabetic. And that's given him, he's needed to kind of work on his body and maintain his weight in order for him to be ready to go as an early enrollee in the 2021 class. So you're going to get a developed guy that's going to be focused on his body, focused on his craft, 6'3", 190 or so. Already a very adept route runner. I love the way that he sinks his hips, and you can tell he had some top-tier, high-level instruction about, running his route and working himself open and, basically owning the route at the top of his route. So lots of things to like, and I think the fact that Georgia takes him first, amongst some other ballyhooed names in the 2021 cycle, Marcus Burke, Malcolm Johnson Jr., Deion Colsey, lots of other names that most Dog fans know a little bit more than Mr. Mitchell. I think that shows you just where he sat on the board, and he was a guy that had been committed to Ole Miss for quite some time prior to him making the flip to Georgia.
This is a little bit of an inside baseball question, but the Tennessean, which is the news outlet in Nashville, obviously published a story, I guess it was late Sunday, that a lot of people saw. That story was then taken down. When something like that happens, is that a news outlet just pushing the publish button too soon, or did the young man Mitchell briefly reconsider his Georgia pledge? What can you tell us about what happened to what amounted to basically a false start of the commitment announcement?
I think there's a lot of things that have to be lined up, Brandon. You have to have the commitment video, the commitment edit. You got to have a lot of things with the release from the young man on his social media. All those have to be kind of aligned or congruent in order for it to make it happen. Might have even been something simple, Brandon, as a miscommunication about when the story was able to be released. It was really interesting from a lot of Dog fans maybe saw that story, and we even discussed it on the Dog Nation forum that evening about, there are certain verifiable things that happened that let us know that committed recruits are actually accepted committed recruits for the University of Georgia. I think if I had to really go through my reporting, I can pull out about maybe 5 or 6 names where some people try to commit to the University of Georgia, not even knowing they have a committable offer, and sometimes they try to claim it on social media. And that's never really the best look when some of those things happen. But with Mitchell, it got certified and verified. I know you love the term blue check mark brigade, but when Kirby Smart gave out the Go Dogs on Monday afternoon, shortly after some really great news from JT Daniels as well, that was the committable Georgia just got a commitment type thing from Kirby Smart that functions as a blue check in this type of arena. And then
Kirby's the one blue check we like. Around here, Kirby's the one blue check we still like. So I got no problem with Kirby Smart tweeting there in that regard. Hey, before we do Broderick Jones to finish off here, give me a quick thought on Jemon Dumas-Johnson. He looks like a big guy. He looks like a thumper. This is a physical linebacker, and in the SEC, that style of play isn't going out of style anytime soon. What else do we need to know about Jemon Dumas-Johnson? Because we haven't talked about him on the show with you yet.
Yeah, so we're going to have a Jemon Dumas-Johnson. We're going to have one of those in a B-more accent, I guess, a little bit. We're going to have a story that goes up on Dog Nation probably within about an hour from now. That's the kind of the A to Z of what we've learned a lot about Mr. Dumas-Johnson over the last 10 days or so. 6'1", about 230. I like the fact that he grew up a skill guy playing running back and taking it to the house a lot up until his 7th, 8th grade year. Brendan, he's actually the second youngest of 7 brothers. Him and his twin, Jemon Dumas-Johnson, who actually play together as linebackers at St. Francis Academy in Baltimore. Their oldest brother is 33 years old. So there's a gap there of about Jemon's 18. He'll be 19 this fall. So there's a gap of about maybe 14 years between the youngest brother and the oldest brother. And, Jemon, credit to him, he's going to be the first one that really makes it big as a football player coming out of that family. He wanted to He had very specific and very noble reasons why he wanted to make his decision known on July the 8th, and I'm sure you guys will get a kick after you get a chance to read that. But I think he's an inside linebacker. It's very funny, Brandon. It seems like Georgia, the way the recruiting industry is viewing some of the guys that Dan Lanning and Glenn Schumann are lining up for this class and the future of the Georgia defense. Have we heard this before? Jemon Dumas-Johnson is actually rated as an outside linebacker, but he will be an inside linebacker in Georgia's scheme. I think, who's that? Who have we said that about so far? Prince Colley,
right?
Barrett Carter, Shmuel Munden Jr. It seems like Georgia is definitely recruiting those athletic, edgy backers that are maybe just not 6'4", 6'5", that will be an inside linebacker for Georgia. And, Dumas-Johnson is another guy that, wants to enroll early. He's at a boarding school in Maryland as well, kind of like ING and Lavoisier Carroll down there in Florida. But he actually lives about 45 minutes away from, in Maryland, away from the Baltimore campus of St. Francis Academy. And he takes a train every weekend back and forth to commute back and forth from his home. But I tell you what, Brandon, when they had that party on July the 8th, there was a whole lot of red and black and a whole lot of Georgia G-shirts. There's probably more, considering he's got 7 brothers, 6 other brothers. There were probably more red power G's in that room than even one of your cookouts, Brandon, around the Adams home. Man, there was a lot of Georgia red in that night.
You love to see that. That's good stuff. Let me finish with this. This is not good stuff. Maybe better than it otherwise could have been. You reported this week at DawgNation.com that Broderick Jones dealt with some kind of injury. I want to get into that a little bit more. Hard not to notice this also comes at the time there's chatter about other 2020 signees who've also dealt with some injury setbacks. Arian Smith comes to mind. There have been others so far here during this offseason. Jeff, I said on the show this week that if it was a motorbike type accident that Broderick Jones was a part of that led to his injury, I wouldn't be mad at him for it. I want young men to be able to live their life. I'm not going to wrap them in bubble wrap. But I still can't quite tell if that is what happened. What did happen with Broderick Jones, the best that we know, that led to his injury? And, I know you've written about this at DawgNation.com, but go into some more detail about how serious or not this is for him.
Yeah, so I did a little bit of reporting on that and checked with a lot of folks who know. And Brandon, the story just doesn't. It's not going to be. The story's not going to be the same in all cases here. I don't know if there's exactly an ABC cookie cutter way to say how all this happened and went down. Here's what I do know. I do know that he didn't suffer any muscle, ligament, or joint damages in the injury. I can't say for certain whether it was a motorbike accident. It could have been a bike accident, Brandon, but one source close to the situation told me that they thought it was a scooter accident. Those type of scooters that you rent in downtown Atlanta or any other community area where you can rent it through your phone and you can just scoot around downtown, and that's a good way to tour the city. One person gave me that bit of information that's what they thought it was. It was classified to me as it wasn't really a big deal. It would be a 2 to 4 week injury. A lot of the people that I spoke to about this said it was more like a 4-week injury where he was not expected to miss any sort of practice time once Georgia, everyone cross their fingers here, start ramping up full bore normal fall camp practices in early August.
Yes, that's obviously good news. I kind of joked with Connor Riley on this show about this yesterday that even though I've got great respect for your reporting and obviously trust the folks close to Broderick Jones, I have a tendency to want to multiply the number a little bit when, someone close to Jones says, this is a couple of weeks, he'll be back. I assume it'll be a little longer than that, but even if that's the case, then, he's still potentially okay here. And, you can understand why they would want to, sort of portray the most optimistic message possible. But ultimately, regardless of what it was, I'm just not that mad at a young man for living his life and enjoying his summer. I don't want kids street racing and things like that. But whatever it was that caused this, for the most part, just not that big of a deal to me, I don't think.
I guess, some of the things with young people, they learn from them, especially when it's a lesson that doesn't prove to be that costly. I know when people think 6'6", 300 pounds and motorized vehicle, everybody starts thinking, at least in my mind, I'll never forget that story about Ron Gant in the 90s with a dirt bike in his Braves contract. I don't think that Broderick Jones was trying to qualify for the Supercross or or Monster Jam or anything else like that. And, let's just say this. Broderick, to me, has always been a guy that, really understands his athletic future, his potential, and how he could set aside things for his family and change generations of his family. He has a lot of people counting on him and depending on him. And maybe this was just an example that will force him to be even more careful down the line, that in the long run might be some risk management insurance against something a lot more dire happening later on in his athletic career.
All right, Jeff, good stuff. Thanks for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger here today. Hope you have a great weekend. I'm going to be on vacation. I'll talk to you again. We'll have a recorded interview with you next Friday as a part of a vacation series of shows, but in person or on the phone here coming up for us in a couple of weeks. So I'll look forward to doing that with you and enjoy, of course, reading all the recruiting coverage you're going to have over the course of the time while I'm gone. So we'll check in with you later on here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
Hey, Brandon, you better keep reading that stuff every day, man. I got to keep you entertained and informed. And, hey, man, in all seriousness, hope you enjoy the time of getting to go soak up some sun and some memories with your family as well. You deserve it, bud.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Yes, sir.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So there's been a lot of talk about lately of, hey, what can you ask college football players to do given the fact they're not paid? Now, I'm a big believer, and I'm not going to do a bunch of Corona stuff today, but I'm a big believer that that's a relatively irrelevant conversation around should college football return because, as has been proven by all kinds of anonymous polls and things like that, college football players want to play college football, but that's not the point I want to get to. That's been a hot topic related to the coronavirus. Seemingly players want to play, at least the overwhelming majority are quite eager to play. So for me, the topic of, well, can you ask football players to play when you have, this coronavirus thing going on? In most cases, you're not asking. They themselves are asking, can we play? However, one area in which I do think how you treat an unpaid college player versus a paid professional athlete, one area in which I do think it's supposed to be way different is in terms of, Jeff Sentell mentioned a moment ago, former Braves outfielder Ryan Gant, involved in a motorbike accident, or professional athlete involved in, I guess we've seen a number of these things over the years. For whatever reason, Jeff Kent comes to mind, the former second baseman for a couple of different teams. I'm sure there are a lot of others there as well. I think you absolutely, in the midst of a contract with a professional athlete, have every right to say, hey, we're giving you this money, but here are a few things that we don't want you to do. And in exchange for this money, here are the rights that you are relinquishing. I think you've got every right to do that. This is one area in which I think that college players really are supposed to be treated differently. That, if you're a football coach, I think there's nothing wrong with strongly suggesting, hey, be careful you don't do anything too dangerous because it's your own future that you're hurting. I think that's well within the coach's rights to say that. But in terms of absolutely, mandating and restricting and things like that, that's just not the kind of person I want to be. I want to be somewhat, is it laissez-faire? Is that how you say that? Is that the right word in this context? I want to let kids live their life. And so, Broderick Jones got a right to privacy. If he doesn't want to talk about what led to his injury, frankly, I'm sort of okay with that too. But if it came out that he was riding some sort of motorbike or something like that, I would not personally be scandalized by that. But I guess if you're one of his family members, should probably tell him to make sure you're being careful out there. But nonetheless, that is where you go with all of that. Let me move on here, and we're doing Own the East preview this week, all throughout next week. I'm not wearing the Own the East t-shirt today, but we are going to do a series of Own the East shows. Own the East is something we've done for a long time around here, and it's about the idea that the first step for Georgia towards winning a national championship is winning your division. That in most cases, unless you're Alabama and you're given a free pass like they were in 2017, in most cases, it's a win the division, get to the SEC championship, win that, get to the college football playoff, and take care of your business once you get there. So the first step towards a national championship is winning the division. It's not a consolation prize for when you don't win the national championship. It's a step towards the process of eventually winning a national championship. What I've said before, and the reason why we use the phrase Own the East, and you saw me wearing the t-shirt last week, you'll see me if you're watching on video anyway, wearing it a lot next week, is because if Georgia wants to be the best kind of program it can be, then it's got to own the division. It's got to go out there and win that thing in a long streak of years. And, well, lo and behold, this upcoming year, Georgia has a chance to win it for the fourth year in a row, and that would be not just fun for UGA fans, but I think important in terms of giving Georgia the best chance to win a national championship. So on the shows next week, Vacation will still be on the air at 10 a.m., a little shorter, but still on the air at 10. Podcast as per usual. Podcast, folks, I may have to go ahead and dump all these podcasts on the podcast platform before I leave to go on vacation. So if y'all want to binge the full week's worth of episodes over the course of the weekend, you may get a chance to do that. But nonetheless, they'll still show up on the website, one per day and things like that. The point here is we'll talk about what Georgia needs to do to own the East in 2020 for the fourth consecutive year. And we'll talk about some of the potential obstacles standing in the way of Georgia in that regard as it tries to own the East here for the fourth straight year. Yesterday, we took a deep dive into Florida, looking to see what Florida brings to the table. I want to talk about Tennessee here for a moment in that same regard. Now, you've heard me say before that generally speaking, I'm not as high on Tennessee as some people are for reasons that I'll kind of get to in a moment. But let me try to be as objective as possible here about what I do think is interesting about the Vols, and a few of the things that I do think makes Tennessee potentially a little bit dangerous. The one thing that no one talks about enough is the presence of Jim Chaney. We didn't see much from Chaney a year ago at Tennessee because, frankly, I'm not quite sure, other than a nice crop of wide receivers, what he always had to work with. But let's not forget, and you can't completely discount this, when Jim Chaney was working with Jake Fromm in 2018, it was a much better performance for Fromm than we got from James Coley's tutelage of Fromm a year ago. Now, there's some mitigating factors, better receivers in 2018, as a for instance. I would say an offensive line level of play that probably performed better in 2018 than it performed in 2019. Maybe the offense that Coley was running is what hurt the offensive line, also possibly too. But the point is that Jim Chaney has been a good offensive coordinator before. He was a good offensive coordinator, I believe, with Jake Fromm in 2018. Not always a perfect offense. They had an odd game plan against LSU in 2018, as a for instance. But Chaney's been more good than bad for his career. And this year he gets a chance to maybe see what he can do with whether it be Jared Garantano, who Tennessee fans I think still feel, or at least they've tried to talk themselves into over the course of the offseason, or the possibility that Harrison Bailey eventually emerges as the starter there. Jim Chaney's going to have a chance to do some work with those guys. Chaney's not always that popular with Georgia fans, the way that a lot of offensive coordinators aren't popular with their own fan base, but don't completely discount the chance that Chaney can do something at Tennessee this year. I've been on record as saying, and this is something that a lot of people won't agree with, that I think that of the current Georgia schedule, assuming it's played as it's supposed to be, I think Tennessee on paper has the best offensive line that Georgia will play. I think on paper the Tennessee offensive line is better than Alabama's. And this is before you find out about Cade Mays' eligibility or not. I think that Wanya Morris is a good player. I think that Trey Smith coming back is a good player. I think Brandon Kennedy's a good player. I think they have some good players along this Tennessee offensive line. Factor in Darnell Wright in this discussion if you want to. I think that while I'm not overall that high on Tennessee, I do think if you're a team like Georgia or any team that has to play against the Vols this season, I do think you have to game plan against that offensive line and realize that offensive line is going to have some moments over the course of a game against you. One thing I'm not quite so sure about is what happens behind the offensive line. I've not been impressed with Tennessee's ability to run the football. I guess Eric Gray is a guy that some Vols fans have tried to tout over the course of this offseason. I'm still not quite sure what Ty Chandler brings to the table. I think there's more pressure on the Tennessee running game this year because, as I mentioned before, Callaway and Jennings, receivers, and Georgia fans saw this in the first half a year ago, receivers that are truly very good, certainly capable and serviceable at the very least. They're not there anymore. That's a little more pressure to be put on the Tennessee running game this year. I'm just not quite so sure if it's ready to do that. Maybe behind a really good offensive line it will be, but I probably like the line more so than the backs. In other words, you may see short yardage runs that add up to something over the course of a game, certainly fatiguing opposing defenses, but when you see the big explosive runs coming out of the holes the offensive line may be able to open up. The one thing I do expect from Tennessee, this is probably still a good defensive team. They did get a setback earlier when Emmett Gooden announced that, or he didn't announce, but it was announced that he's no longer on the Tennessee roster. That was a defensive lineman they were going to depend on. Greg Emerson's still there, but Gooden is not. Henry Toto is probably a difference-making type of player. I do expect the Vols to continue to be very good in the secondary, much the same way Kirby Smart's kind of always going to have a good secondary. Jeremy Pruitt's probably always going to have a good secondary there as well. However, ultimately, this matters to me. We think of Tennessee as ending the season a year ago on a very high note, but be really, really careful by putting a lot of faith in stock in close wins. Kentucky, Missouri, Indiana in the bowl game. Indiana in the bowl game is the biggest example of this because Tennessee was dead to right a couple of times during that game, but finally came back and beat the Indiana Hoosiers. But these close wins that Tennessee eked out a year ago certainly made last season feel more successful than Vols fans probably thought it was going to be. But be really careful using these close wins against lesser opponents as any kind of evidence that Tennessee's building something for this upcoming year. You'll hear me do this next week, but when it comes to my official SEC East predictions, I'm going to have Tennessee lower than a lot of other folks are going to have, and I'm going to have South Carolina a little higher. Much the same way that Tennessee benefited from a lot of close wins a year ago, South Carolina was hamstrung by a lot of close losses. Those things have a way, not always perfectly, it's not always a tit-for-tat exchange, but those things have a way of correcting themselves year over year. I'm a little higher on South Carolina than some, a little lower on Tennessee than others. However, as we said before, there are some things to be paying attention to with Tennessee. Good offensive line, I think sharp offensive coordinator, the search for the quarterback is ongoing, a defense that's not going to give up a ton to you, a defense that's going to force you to work for the points you're going to score. Tennessee could be in plenty of games, but on the basis of what we would think of as a 12-game schedule, just for the sake of conversation, this to me is not an 8-win, 9-win type of team. I think they're scuffling to even have a winning record, even with seemingly kind of a growing level of talent. By the way, speaking of our friends at Kroger, let me remind you that you can still earn 2 times the fuel points here all the way through July 26th. So still some time to take advantage of this. You can download the coupon right now, either Kroger.com or the Kroger app. You can start saving and earning those double fuel points today. A great, great way to put more money in your pocket, and another example of how Kroger's really taking care of folks during what has been a very challenging season. So I'll say goodbye to you. Huge thanks to all of you for making this a fun summer so far. And, I try not to take a lot of days off because, frankly, I like to be here. I like to be doing the show. For a week in the summer, I like to kind of batten down the hatches and be with my family and just kind of try to recharge the batteries and get ready for what's to come after that. And, listen, if I could leave you with one thought right now, it is this, is that I expect to come back 2 Mondays from now to a happy place. I expect there to be a lot of good things to talk about. I am still very optimistic that we're going to have a really fun season. Is it different than I probably thought it would have been a year ago looking ahead to this time? In some form or fashion, it's going to be different, but different doesn't have to mean worse. There is still a lot of fun. And as I said off the top of the program, and Jeff Sentell talked about there as well, elite recruiting class for 2021, a clear path towards that as well. So y'all have a great week. Enjoy our Own the East pre-recorded shows for next week. I'll see you Monday. By the way, Gator Hater Updater, 1,357 days. Have a great week, everybody. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. Huge thanks to all of you for making this a fun week leading into a vacation for me. Really appreciate all of you for that. And if some of you have vacation plans or, stopping and, recharging the batteries, I hope that's all going well and you're setting yourself up for some fun summertime plans. I'll remind you that one of the things that makes the summer better is a nice, cool, crisp air conditioning. If you've got that going on at your house, you know how important that is. If you're worried that you might not, get your system tuned back up to factory fresh specs with our friends at R.S. Andrews. They'll take good care of you over there. Let me go to Facebook first, and we'll get some comments there, and we'll do some YouTube, and then we will get out the door here on a Friday. It always takes Facebook comments now a little time to load up because of this brand new Facebook video interface, which is just a total mess. But so I'll kill a little bit of time here and give these a chance to pop up, and we shall see how that goes. Do I dare refresh this screen, start this all over again? Still no comments. All right. Look, thanks for your help. Let me just try YouTube for a second, and then we'll come back over to Facebook in just a moment. Yeah, Facebook has recently changed some stuff around as these technology, platforms have a tendency to want to do. So let me go over to YouTube, which is always at least a dependable interface, if not always dependable once you get into the comments on that. As I said before, I hope you're all getting ready for a great weekend and hope you're enjoying some exciting stuff, heading towards a fun week. Cliff Payne, good to have you in the comment section. Thanks so much. Good to see Cliff Payne checking in today. Mark Abe, thanks for the kind words. Appreciate that. Jason Crosby checking in with some comments. Nice to see. Ronnie Hugh on the subject of Deion Colsey. I have to admit, I don't know what's going on there. I really don't. It seems like I hear conflicting stuff back and forth on that. I'm just not quite so sure. Just not quite sure. James Wade asked a good question about Nathaniel Wiggins. I think that's a fair question. Jacob Thompson says, why is YouTube the middle child of the DawgNation Daily social media? By no means is that true. By no means. And every now and then I hear from people on Twitter that's the middle child. One of the reasons why it's a little harder to read the Twitter comments, because they kind of disappear. You have to click into it to like see the comments. It's much, much easier to read the YouTube comments. YouTube, I would say, I'm always bragging on the YouTube platform. CB says, can you comment on the SEC and ACC working together to fill in each other's schedules? Yeah, I think that'd be great. I guess I'm a little skeptical of the idea that you're going to be able to play, and I hate to be this way because some of you will say this is being negative. I hope it's not. This just occurred to me last night. I was thinking about something else. I guess I no longer think college football is going to play a 12-game schedule, which is a pretty big leap for me to get to, just given the fact that I've been holding out as much possible hope as possible. I'm actually in a pretty good mood about where I think college football is to end this week, and yet I'm pretty sure that I don't think it's going to be 12 games worth. So given that as the scenario, I like the idea of the SEC, the ACC, and I'd add the Big 12 into this too because they are a part of this discussion, I think. I like the idea of them helping each other a little bit, but somehow I don't think that, if I had to guess, I don't think it ends up being a second non-conference game that gets added. I could see Georgia playing Georgia Tech, but not playing Virginia, in other words. And this is all speculation on my part, and I've got my reasons for saying what I'm saying that I won't necessarily bore you with, and I'm also wrong all the time. I cited an example on the show yesterday in which I had been, kind of wrong about something and also right about something as well. So, we bat about 50-50 around here the same way almost anybody else would. Yeah, so from that standpoint, I like the idea of them working to help each other, but just giving a lot of extenuating circumstances, I wonder if that work to help would be to add additional non-conference games beyond the one that almost everybody in the SEC is already playing. Remember, Georgia's the only team in the SEC that has 2 Power 5 non-conference foes right now. Everybody else has got just the one. Georgia has the 2. It's just a unique year. We've seen in years past a lot of SEC teams that may have the multiple Power 5 non-conference foes. South Carolina, for instance, would be one the last couple of years that's had that. This year, that's just not quite the case. So it may just be easier, even though it's less football, and that's not what I want. It may just be easier to do 8 plus the 1 non-conference game because, for the most part, the SEC is already on a pretty even footing there in that regard. Memphis Dog says I'm right about being wrong. Yeah, that's the one thing I do get right, is the fact that occasionally I'm wrong. Alan Berry says, if Georgia's first game is at Alabama, does it help or hurt Georgia? So, once again, I hope, because I want as much football as possible, that Georgia, it seems like bad news that Georgia, might not play until what's currently scheduled to be middle of September against the Crimson Tide. I think you can make a case that Georgia with a good defense, Georgia with a mysterious quarterback situation. We're going to talk about that on Monday's show. I do think you can make a case that Georgia, the element of surprise, might benefit from an early season game in Alabama, or, as you said, possible season opener, given one scenario that might play out for the schedules. I think you could kind of make a case that element of surprise could help Georgia a little bit. Generally speaking, I'm not a huge fan of the element of surprise anyway. I don't like trick plays, as a for instance. If you're counting on surprise or tricking someone to get over on them, typically speaking, that wears off pretty quickly. But just in broad terms, yeah, the element of surprise against Alabama would seemingly help a little bit on the basis of how I think I understand that game right now. Let me try Facebook now, and we'll come back to YouTube here in a moment. Boy, what is going on here? This is really something. For whatever reason, my Facebook comments aren't popping up right now. I don't understand that. Like the little side panel where they normally show up are here. The Facebook comments themselves are not here. Gracious sakes. There's always something, isn't it? At least we're working on Facebook today. I know we had that problem the other day. Back over here on YouTube for a moment. Memphis Dog says Dogs could use a tune-up before Alabama. Maybe so. Although this year, the college football fans' expectation for the tune-ups, like the one thing I'm pretty confident you're not going to see, if this was like a roulette wheel, like a roulette table, and we had to put some chips down on a spot, I guess craps kind of work that same way too, but if we had to put some chips down on a spot, the one chip I would put down on a spot right now, the one bet I'd make you right now is a Power 5 team will not play a Group of 5 or less team this year. If I had to make one bet on anything, that's the one bet that I would make is you will not see Power 5s play Group of 5s this year. And, media would say, well, that's about testing protocols. I think a lot of that's about money. But the one thing really one of the main reasons I'm starting to feel like you probably won't see 12 games is because I think these conferences are going to do everything they can to get out of their contracts with these Group of 5 opponents, because so much of the way that you recoup that $1 million plus you have to pay to these teams is through what the revenue you make inside the stadium on a game day. And this year, that's going to be greatly reduced, if not completely eliminated. Rune D says, I shaved the beard before the Bama game. Yeah, listen, I shaved the beard. People started saying I looked old with the beard, so listen, I can't be doing that. Noah Sheldon 500, thank you for the kind words. I really appreciate that. Facebook comments, folks, I'm trying my best to get these things to show up. I don't know why they're not doing this today. Let's try this. Nope. Still nothing. Get the comment. Let me just try my phone. That should probably work. Pardon me. It's also getting late. I went forever with Jeff, so we can't stay much longer anyway. Let's try the phone here and see if we can get this going. Yeah, I just really feel like that Facebook platform is way different than it used to be. All right, let's see if I can get the comments. Here they go. Barry Watkins says I would put Chip down on a delay for the football season. Yeah, I would say that, as I was kind of jokingly saying before, I guess I'm starting to feel like, it could be delayed a little bit, but I'm not as worried about that as I once was. I mean, I took a lot of confidence and some comfort in what, the SEC administrators were reported to have said, according to the Sports Illustrated story. I took some comfort in that. So given where I think college football is right now, whatever delay, games getting canceled, it's seemingly not the ones that we want to see. Now, I'm a big fan of the fan experience in college football, and we may have some issues related to that, but, just given how strongly some are suggesting there should be no college football, the fact that some folks within the sport are seemingly willing to step up and say, no, here's how we can have college football, here's why we need to have college football, and here are our plans to move forward and do that because we believe we can take good care of the people we're in charge of watching over. I feel like from that standpoint, I feel like I'm leaving to go on vacation in a pretty good place with all of that. Jacob O'Neill said, I just wanted to spend my time on YouTube. And here's what's funny, as I pull up the phone comments, now they are showing up on my laptop. So there you go. I guess you just never quite know. So let me work off the laptop here for a couple more minutes on Facebook. Frank Crowder weighing in. Joe Moody going under 800 rushing yards, 9 touchdowns. I'm not sure that for. Jay Harwell says, I say this, let me get this kind of interesting. He talked about the idea of a shortened schedule, how that would potentially impact a longer playoff. Here's the one thing that it'll never stop being frustrating. When it comes to stuff like this, it's still going to be hard to get everybody to agree. And the thing that matters seemingly the least is the competitive part of all of this. Hey, if you've got fewer regular season games, a longer playoff would be the best way to determine a national champion. I'm talking about the powers that be, seemingly. They're just not necessarily going to do that, because the one thing that you saw from the Sports Illustrated story this week about the potential SEC schedule is, hey, we as fans think, this would be a great year just to play 10 SEC games and call it a day. There was seemingly no appetite for that whatsoever, because that's an inconvenience. SEC coaches don't want to play more games against SEC foes, and they have to, because the odds are you're going to lose a couple of more games that way. So they don't want to do that. You could potentially see the same thing with an extended playoff there as well, that even though it seems to be a good way to solve some competitive problems, ultimately competitive problems appear to take a backseat to the financial problems when it comes to a lot of these administrators, and that's where it kind of gets frustrating. You saw some of that with Major League Baseball and really a lot of things there as well. Daniel Aldrich says, I don't like this YouTube channel, too many trolls. Barry Watkins says Air Dogs this year. That's fun to think about. Oh, Chris Slim White says it's James Cook who's the over 809 touchdowns, 400 receiving yards. We're going to talk about Cook a little bit next week. I mean, I'm like everybody else. I think that James Cook has a chance to do really well in Todd Monken offense. I hope that's true. Joel Moody says colleges need college football revenue. Yeah, I think that there is a little bit of a symbiotic relationship between the colleges themselves and the college football programs we sometimes don't talk enough about. Gerald Harmon says, could you see a 2-quarterback system at Georgia between Newman and Daniels? I kind of could. And my only reason for saying that is let's operate for a moment on the assumption that Georgia was going to play a 12-game schedule the way that it was originally slated to be. Other than Alabama, Auburn, and Florida, maybe Tennessee, but to be clear, Alabama, Auburn, and Florida, those are the 3 games when you need to have an idea who your best quarterback is. For most of those other games, given how good I think Jamie Newman is and given how good I think JT Daniels has a chance to be, given everything else that Georgia has going for it, you ought to be able to play both those guys a lot. Neither guy would seem to be a detriment to you on the football field. It remains to be seen how great either one's going to be. But in terms of being a detriment to you on the field, I have a hard time believing either Newman or Daniels would be that way. If Georgia, as a 17, 20-point favorite in a lot of these games, is winning by 17 or 20 points, then you ought to have some opportunities to play both those guys. So yeah, Gerald, I think that's a good question. And my answer is you probably need to know who your best guy is at Alabama. It's early in the season. You may guess wrong, but you need to probably have a guy you think gives you the best chance of winning. I think Auburn defensively is good enough where you want to make sure you've got best foot forward there. Florida, clearly, a game that could decide the SEC East. Florida's got an easy schedule. They're not going to help you very much in terms of losing games to knock themselves out of contention. You're going to have to do that for yourself. So you probably need to know who your best quarterback is for those 3 games. But when you're playing, the rest of these opponents, you ought to be able to play just about anybody you want to. Nathan Edwards says, do you think they would spread out players on campus so if you have a few of them living together, so if one tests positive, you didn't lose as many? Yeah, if you can find a way to do that. I mean, listen, the one thing I've never pretended to do, and I've said this over and over again, I am not going to be coronavirus scientist. I'm not going to be that's not the role I'm trying to fill here. But I do read a lot about this kind of stuff, as I'm sure many of you do there as well. And like the one thing that you keep seeing as being a concern is what is happening in these close living arrangements. That's been a little bit of a challenge. That some disease has spread in these close living arrangements. And when it comes to the colleges themselves, both in terms of the regular students and the football programs, is we think about large gatherings and football players colliding with each other, contact sport. But one of the biggest issues is how you handle that close living environment, because there's been a lot of evidence about how people in a small space for a long period of time, just how much of a disease spreader that has kind of been. As I said before, don't use me as a substitute for your coronavirus science news. That's not the role I'm trying to fill in your life, but we have kind of read some of that kind of stuff. And if we were to just, stipulate for a moment that most of the players that get coronavirus are at the college level may recover and may eventually be fine. I do think from a football standpoint, to make this about on-field competition for a moment, finding a way to keep one guy from giving it to 9 guys is going to be pretty important. And how you do that is one of the challenges. Like the one thing that I've always kind of said is, I think that sometimes we get the conversation backwards. I think we say, well, these football programs, all they care about is money, so therefore they're going to do everything they can to have college football. I think the exact opposite might be true, at least in one respect. Let me explain what I mean. These football programs have so much money that they can confront the coronavirus in a way that other entities in life just might not be able to. The infinite resources that college football seem to have in comparison to a lot of other institutions just make it easier to do crazy stuff. Like for instance, you've heard the stories of how like Georgia comes in, they players work out, then the place is like completely cleaned, and then someone else coming in to work out again. That's just like one example of this where most businesses or whatever, they're not cleaning something deeply every hour, but at a place like Georgia, you've got the resources to be able to do something like that. And I do truly believe that creative thinkers, limitless financial opportunities, I mean, I think there's a way to protect these football players, at least based on my understanding of it. Barry Watkins says, my son, a high school football team, had a player test positive, and they shut it down for 2 weeks. At the high school level, that's where it's going to be tough. And I guess we've seen Cobb County announce that it's going to go online only to begin the year. Some other of the Metro Atlanta systems have kind of done that. I mean, the one thing I've tried to have some empathy and compassion about is if you're in the person who's in charge, whether it be in charge of a football team, in charge of an athletic department, in charge of a high school team, in charge of a high school, in charge of the academic environment, it's very, very hard to want to step up and take responsibility when you know how much liability is coupled with that responsibility. So it's easy for me to Monday morning quarterback and say, well, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do that. Ultimately, I'm not going to be the one that gets blamed if someone gets sick. When you are the one that's going to get blamed for that, I do think you have a tendency to look at things just a little bit differently. And you see this with a lot of politicians too, by the way. Let's move on. Let me do a couple more on YouTube, and then we'll come back to Facebook and kind of wrap things up. Let's see what else is going on. James Wade says, if you have 2 quarterbacks, you don't have one. Someone has to be the guy. I understand where you're coming from on that. I would say that, I mean, I just don't know that that's as true maybe as it used to be, assuming you're winning these games easily. Now, if Georgia's playing, a knockdown, drag-out game against Auburn, if you're rotating quarterbacks every series there, I probably don't feel as good about that situation. But if you're up 19 points on Kentucky, then what does it matter? In that respect, what does it matter to me if you're playing JT Daniels or playing Jamie Newman, especially when, like, the one thing that I have said that not everybody agrees with is you probably should try to do what you can to keep both these guys happy, right? Because future quarterbacks are looking in on this. And so if both guys are good enough to play, even if one guy is slightly better than the other, if both guys are good enough to play, you should probably try to find a way to keep both these guys happy if you can, because I want quarterbacks to view Georgia as the kind of place you want to be. And if a guy transfers in and you don't use him, that's the kind of thing people have a tendency to talk about after the fact. All right, we're going to get ready to go. Let's see what else. Jacob Thompson on the subject of a quarterback potentially testing positive. I mean, I really do think one way creatively, you got to try to figure out a way to keep, guys from coming in contact with each other too much. The last thing you want is a bunch of quarterbacks in one small room together doing a bunch of meetings together, at least if I had to say. Chris Slim White says it's when the young men are out on their own or when they're with a girlfriend. Are they just with friends? It's not as easy as we want to make it out to be. I totally agree with you on this. And Chris, the one thing I'll say is, like, back during the heart of the lockdown, like back when I was doing shows at home and, when we first went into lockdown conditions, like, my family, we were pretty strict about that. We didn't let our kids do anything. We weren't leaving the house. I was going to Kroger, and that's about it. We weren't, no takeout for us for a while. We were really pretty locked down for a good while. And like, the one thing I heard from, because my kids are young, I have an 8-year-old, a 5-year-old, and so with young children like that, it's fairly easy to do, at least for a while. It gets harder after a month or two, but for a little while, it's fairly early. But your point about high school age kids, in these cases, guys that only recently graduated from high school, it is really, really hard to manage their behavior. I heard from so many parents of high school age kids, not athletes, just regular high schoolers. They're like, I'm trying to get my son to stay home, but he just won't. And it's not that he's like being openly defiant, but kids just kind of find a way to get with their friends. They just kind of find a way to do that, especially when one thing that some parents were saying to me is that not every parent necessarily had the same, ideas around what the lockdown should look like. And so for a parent who was trying to instill this at home, it wasn't necessarily being reinforced by the friends of the girlfriend or whatever else, the other situation there. And I think that's true. And, that's just a really, really tough, challenging situation that if the college football player goes home, it's not that he's going to go lock himself in his room and not come into contact with anybody else. A lot of these guys are going to try to live their life, in their hometown, as I probably would as well if I was 18, 19, or 20 years old. that has a way of sounding like propaganda as someone who wants college football to take place. And that's one of the reasons why I try not to make arguments like that too much. But I can say from Chris's very point that he mentions in the comment section that I talked to a bunch of people who were like, man, keeping these guys away from their girlfriends, keeping these friends from just finding a way to get around each other, that is not an easy thing to do. Daniel Aldridge, thanks for the kind words. Appreciate that. John Anthony on the subject of Eddie not wearing a mask. I tried to find Eddie a mask at one point in time. I couldn't find one that was small enough. Matt Rukavina, enjoy yourself. I'm not surprised to hear that you're traveling. It seems like you always are. All right, last thing we're going to go. Let me go back over to YouTube for a second. This is the latest we've done on this in a while. James Wade heard the Kroger plug. Listen, James, I never stop working. I'm always trying to find that angle. Never stop working. All right, we got to go. Speaking of plugs, let me remind you a couple of things. First of all, check out AJC.com, Atlanta News Now. There's a bunch of stuff going on that we don't talk about around here. But if you're interested in mask politics, things like that, it's actually really pretty interesting. And the AJC's done a great job of covering it. You can find out your Atlanta News Now at AJC.com on that front. Also, heading towards a good weekend. Always fun stuff. AJC previewing the weekend. Lots of ways to be outside and do some things. No fans, by the way, for Falcons training camp coming up. AJC all over that. Weird stuff with the Washington NFL team. You can deal with some of that there at AJC.com as well. And so, yeah, just some good stuff. Atlanta News Now, AJC.com. Make sure you check that out. Speaking of good stuff, R.S. Andrews, got it for you at rsandrews.com. I love Dari, the whole team over there. They've been delivering smiles, story after story. They could deliver a smile for you. Maybe they could deliver a smile Mondin for George. We'll have to ask them and see if that's on their services list. We'll have to find that out. But nonetheless, check them out online for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. We'll be back again on Monday at 10 a.m. It'll be pre-recorded, but it should be a lot of fun. I can't talk to you, but y'all can still talk to each other. And then the following Monday, I'll be back live for DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. Have a great, great week, everybody. Thanks for letting me be away for a few days, and I'll look forward to seeing you soon. And when we get back, my prediction is there'll be a lot of good stuff to talk about. See you then. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.